Hi, Sharna back again with another card video, this time featuring some Neat and Tangled products. I'm going to go ahead and start with the stamp set from Neat and Tangled Little Monster. It's adorable. I also used an Avery Elle stitched wonky stitched rectangle, blah. Some watercolor brushes, Daniel Smith, and some distress inks. I'm going to go ahead and put the Daniel Smith out here on a cheap plastic palette. This black is really black. It's the lunar black color. And I'm doing wet to dry with my stripes. And I'm going to go back in several times until I get the darkness that I really wanted. I just did this really loose. You could measure this out and tape it off and do all that, but I just used the size of my brush to determine the size of my stripes on the background. It's easiest for me. And then I'm going to go ahead and make a palette with my distress colors. I went in rainbow order just because I've been feeling the rainbows lately. And I used my dirty water, but it ends up not mattering. The distress inks covered that up pretty well. They're pretty bright. And I will have all the colors marked below, along with any Copic colors that I use. So I went back and I mixed the pink and the yellow because it wasn't mixing so well on my watercolor paper, and that's just some distress watercolor paper. And this is some Neenah Solar White. I'm going to go ahead and stamp out my images. I am using a MISTI just because it's easier for me to restamp, make sure I have a good stamping image, and I do like to stamp a few times so that I have multiple images in case something doesn't turn out how I like. That ended up being a good thing because I had to record this video twice because I lost some of my original coloring footage. So the cards, you'll see both cards at the end, but the one at the beginning was the original card. So there are some slight variances, not enough to make a difference here. So when I'm doing Copic coloring, I like to start darkest to lightest. And like I said, I'll have all the markers listed below, but these are the neutral grays. And I think I started with about an 8. I like a lot of contrast in my images, but sometimes I'm not that daring when it comes to how dark I go. And I did try to leave a highlight between his arm and his body, so there's some definition there. And I went ahead and started with my darkest marker, and I worked dark to light just to prevent bleeding. When I was really struggling at the beginning when I first picked up Copic markers, I would go from light to dark and back again, and I was getting so much bleeding all over the place and not getting the blending I wanted, and I would lose my highlights all the time. So I just found it easier for me to start with the darkest marker and work my way lightest and only do one coat unless I happen to lose the darkness because a lighter color pushed it out. I will go ahead and re-add my shadows, but usually that only happens once in a while. And the toner grays, some markers do it more often than others. Sorry, did I say toner? I meant neutral. I'm using the neutral grays. And I wanted this to be pretty monotone with pops of color. I used 4 markers, and I used the second to lightest marker for most of the coloring, a majority of the body, and filled in the highlights last so they wouldn't get lost. And I just like really strong contrast. You don't have to use this much markers in your coloring. It's just the look that I prefer. And you'll find as you color that you like ways certain color patterns mix and some don't, and whether you like a lot of contrast or more flat. Here in the horns, since there's less space, I only use 2 colors, and since it's not a majority of the coloring, I didn't think it was a problem. When I originally did this coloring, I screwed up the horns too, because part of his horn's actually behind his head. So I started with the pink, and you actually should start with the blue if you're going in rainbow order. Or pink, orange, sorry. Should start with the orange. And I didn't use every color, obviously, because there's not enough stripes on his horns, but I wanted him to match the background. And I didn't want him to be totally gray. So I'm just adding some pops of color here and there in my image. I went ahead and colored in his spots with some of the matching markers that I used on his horns. And I was struggling with deciding whether I wanted to put a color on his belly or not. But in the end I just colored the whole thing in gray. And this is the second time coloring it, so I already knew what I wanted to do by the second time. And I did the cupcake wrapper in the same colors. I figured I already had a ton of markers out on my desk. I didn't want to pull even more out. So I'm just going to reuse the same markers I already have, and it keeps the whole card cohesive, in my opinion anyways. I mean, do whatever you feel like doing, obviously. But for the whole rest of this, I'm not going to use a ton of markers because he is the focus, so I spent most of my time concentrating on him. And I stamped the balloon, but I didn't end up using it in the final image of the card. I played around with it. And I actually didn't use it because I got smudge marks all over it. I don't know if you can see that on camera, but my Daniel Smith background wasn't dry and I stuck my thumb in it, and then it was leaving fingerprints everywhere, which I ended up having to fix with one of my erasers, sand erasers, which are very handy tools to have. If you don't have one, I do recommend picking it up. So I went back to those same rainbow markers and I'm filling in with, again, 2 colors just to give it a little bit of a gradient effect, and a little bit of interest to the sentiment here. And I do use 2 kinds of purple since there are so many letters and I didn't want to repeat the pink. So I ended up using like more of a red purple and then more of a blue purple. And again, all the colors will be listed below. And if you have any questions about what colors I'm using or why I'm using them, feel free to leave me a comment and I will try and answer. So that's all the coloring on this card. And those are all the markers that I used for the rainbows. And that's all the grays, in case anybody wants to stop the video. Otherwise, again, listed below. I feel like I'm a broken record at this point. And then I cut them all out so I could use my Sidekick and not have to go under my desk for my giant Vagabond machine. I do have a Vagabond. I love it, but for small things like this, it's much easier with the Sidekick, and I am so grateful that I got this little machine. And it was definitely a good purchase, especially when filming videos. Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure that I'm lining everything up correctly. I am terrible at die cutting, let me tell you, just terrible. My images shift all the time and I end up having to recut things. Again, that's why I stamp multiple times. My dies shift on me, and that's mostly just user error. I'm lazy and I don't always line things up correctly. So the more you put your head straight over your project, the better your die cutting is going to be. Let me just give you that tip. And now I'm just going to go ahead and line up everything so that I can stamp the rest of the sentiment directly on the image, or directly on the background, I should say. So I have my monster cut out and I'm just using that as a reference as to how high I want to stamp the secondary part of the sentiment on here. It actually came out pretty good the second time. So I'm not even going to bother restamping it for this card. Sometimes on that watercolor paper, though, you do have to stamp it multiple times, which is why I like the stamp platforms, just to make sure. And that's my Big Mama roll of foam tape. This is actually my second one. My first one lasted about a year. I use a ton of foam tape all over everything. I'm trying to be better about it, but I just like all the dimension on my cards. So you're going to see me coat literally every single object here with foam tape. I think I need a foam tape intervention. My husband always laughs when he sees me pulling that out. So then I'm just going to line up everything, get everything ready to go. That's a 110-pound Neenah for my base. And I'm just going to line everything up, try and get it straight. Nothing is ever straight on my cards. And there's a sand eraser. I'm taking off all the fingerprints I left everywhere. And I used my Xyron Mega Runner to attach that. And that's actually really sticky and I'm really happy with it. So if anybody is questioning what adhesive runner they have and don't like the glue that they have. This one seems to be really strong, and my cards have not come apart so far with that one. My cards are displayed up at Craft Fancy, so they do have a hang on the wall, and that tends to put stress on the cards since they're gravity pulling down on everything. So I do like a strong adhesive, and so far so good with this one. So now I'm just deciding how I want everything laid out. And this monster is just absolutely so stinking cute. I am obsessed with him. And my son is obsessed with monsters, so this card was absolutely perfect for him. He loves it. So there's both of them that I ended up meeting for the video. So that's it.